Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Tell Us a Good Story. Today, we had the privilege of having a conversation with Mr. Jack Park. This man is an Ohio State football encyclopedia. It was fascinating to hear him talk about coaches, his first time meeting Woody Hayes. He told us a great story about Urban Meyer and Lou Holtz. If you are a college football fan, you will enjoy this conversation on
Tell Us a Good Story.
All right, Steph, I am super excited about this.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
We dressed up
in honor of him.
Yes.
In honor of him.
Of our next guest.
Oh, we're excited.
This is pretty exciting. So, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is an Ohio State football radio commentator for Sports Radio 97.1 The Fan here in Columbus, Ohio. Mm-hmm. He is featured frequently in football programming on ESPN, the Big Ten Network, and Time Warner Cable. He's also a best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and the pride of New Lexington High School. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Tell Us a Good Story, Mr. Jack Park. Hello,
sir. Welcome.
Great, Kevin, Stephanie. Hey, it's great to be with you, and always look forward to talking about Buckeye football.
Well, I love his background. That office where he's at is perfect.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Absolutely perfect. So, Jack, of course, we were thinking about where could we get some good Ohio State football stories, and you're the perfect person to ask
perfect
to, right?
person.
So I guess the first thing we were wondering, what was the first game you attended, like as a kid? Because like us, growing up in Ohio, we're Ohio State football fans, but what was the first game that you attended as an Ohio State fan?
Well, I was very fortunate as a youngster. My dad graduated from Ohio State University. Actually graduated in engineering. He played the marching band for that matter, and was a huge football fan. And then my mother was a graduate of Ohio University and was a high school history teacher.
Okay.
So I got my love of football from my dad and my love of history, I think, from my mother. And I'm an only child, and we started going to the games when I was pretty young, and I just kind of something that I just got hooked on, basically, is a love for the Ohio State football program. In fact, I think it bothered my mother a little bit the time I got to be maybe in what today we'd call middle school. She had a talk with me one time, and she said, you know, there's things in life besides sports. And everything, but you might want to take an interest in a few other things. But I think basically I've just always had a love for the Ohio State football program and everything like that. I was very fortunate that a number of years ago to be asked by what is now 97.1 The Fan, Core Sports Radio, to come in and start doing some commentaries for them on Saturdays. And that, of course, has expanded over the years. And I do a segment on the pregame show every year on every Saturday, every football Saturday, with the host Anthony Rothman. And we usually have a couple former players on with us.
Right.
Depends on what the game is and so forth like that. And I also do a lot of speaking on Ohio State football. One of the things that's been the most fun probably was writing the books and doing all the interviews with the coaches, and particularly doing a lot of the research and everything like that. Ohio State football has such a great history and a great tradition. And if it wasn't for that, I couldn't do what I do. So it's really the subject matter that I think it's really appealing to the people, not so much the guy that's delivering the message.
Well, but the guy who delivering the message is pretty darn good as well, quite honestly. How you present it, the format, the knowledge that you have. Because Steph and I were talking before you came on, and of course you've written 4 books. You are like an award-winning public speaker as well. But when you look at your books, the foreword, the introduction, it's Archie Griffin, it's Jim Tressel, it's Urban Meyer, Luke Fickell, Mike Vrabel. I mean, this is like the premier Hall of Fame type people, right? And so, Jack, they don't sign up for just Joe Schmo down the street, right? So there's more to it to the author than just the format, quite honestly.
Well, I think anything you do in life, if you love what you do the best that you can, and you do this for some period of time, you develop relationships with the people that are involved. And at this stage of my Ohio State football career, basically my relationships with those people that you just mentioned are every bit as important to me, probably more important than the fact that we've won so many national championships and have Heisman Trophy winners and everything. In fact, three of my closest friends are Ryan Miller, Luke Fickle, and Mike Vrabel, as you've mentioned. They're the Second and Seven Foundation.
Yes.
A lot of you are aware of. They provide basically books for a lot of inner city kids that come out of homes that don't have a lot of opportunities within their homes to learn how to read. And I thought that's an excellent thing that they've done. In fact, they just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Second and Seven Foundation just last year.
Wow.
So we've become good friends over the years in that manner. I've gotten to know Coach Day some here as he's come in, and he's certainly been a wonderful, wonderful addition to the Ohio State football program. And without question, his season last year was really something.
What's he like behind the scenes, Jack? I mean, because from an outsider, it looks like he's, intensity-wise, he's a 180 from Coach Meyer.
I think every head coach that we've had, that's starting with Woody Hayes and coming forward. And in fact, one thing we could say about that is the stability of the Ohio State coaching program. I mean, starting with Woody Hayes, which was 70 years ago.
Oh, man.
In 1951. In other words, the 2020 season will be the 70th year if you include Coach Hayes' first year in 51. We've had Coach Hayes and we had Coach Bruce. We had Coach John Cooper. Of course, we had Jim Tressel. Luke Fickle did a great job in his 1 year as kind of the interim coach.
Right.
And then, of course, we've had Urban Meyer. And then what a start for Coach Day. So many programs, including the University of Michigan, they've been changing coaches every 3 or 4 years. And one of the things that's really helped Ohio State is the fact that there's been so much stability. I would say Urban Meyer was probably a little bit more intense than Ryan Day is. Jim Tressel was truly the organization man. I mean, he was the organization man. I mean, he really was on top of everything within the football program. Not that the other coaches aren't, but he seemed to have an ability to do that was about as good as I've ever seen. And, of course, Woody Hayes was he was Ohio State football to the nth degree. Everything was based on excellence. Bruce took over after him. John Cooper was probably, of all the coaches that I've worked with, was probably the most media friendly.
Right.
He was the easiest by far to get appointments with and interview the players and everything. And I don't mean to indicate in any way that the others are difficult, but there's no question that John Cooper bent over backwards to help the media.
When you think about the coaches in the past, present, is there any that you'd get a little intimidated when you're getting ready to speak with them, or was it always just a very easy conversation?
I'd say certainly in the recent years, it's been very, very easy because I know the coaches and I'm not at all intimidated with that. When I first started doing what I do, the first coach I ever interviewed was Woody Hayes.
Oh.
And I was just starting, and he didn't know me from Adam, but he granted me an interview, and I was nervous going in.
I bet.
And I had spent hours with all my questions and everything like this, and we went in there. We never even talked about football. But he
really
around, and he had a reputation for this. He wanted to know about you. What is it you're doing? Actually, I'm an MBA. I'm a CPA. I had a pretty good career in the business world, and now I still do that, but I'm combining that now with football, with what we call the leadership secrets of football's master coaches. And Coach Hayes was so well educated in things far more than football, and it was really, those interviews are things I'll never forget, but we really never talked about football, basically. I don't think he wanted to talk about football. He wanted to talk about other things in life and how football can be maybe a gateway to things in your life that, as life goes along, become more important.
So that first meeting then with Coach Hayes, because that was one of the things I was curious about, like if you had met Woody Hayes. So that first meeting, like how much time did he give you? Was
about an hour.
Was it really?
Yeah, but that time his office was over in what is called the ROTC building. Of course, he retired as coach, and he stayed on. And Coach Hayes lived another 9 years after he was no longer the head coach here. And we were not close friends. I don't want to think we were. I mean, I might do an interview with him one day, and I might see him at a dinner or something in a month or so after that, and he would recognize me, come up and talk. I don't think he could have come up with my name, though. I don't think he really knew my name unless I mentioned it. Then he might remember my name. But can you imagine how many people Woody Hayes met over his 28 years?
Oh, man.
Let alone And his 9 years of greatest service, in my opinion, to the Ohio State University were not 9 of the years he coached, but the 9 years that he lived after he was no longer coaching. Because he went out not on the most glorious way possible, certainly, but he continued to devote his life to people. And what, through his position at the Ohio State University, he could help people. And some of those people had never played football, but they were just people that needed some help. And maybe they were down on their luck a little bit, or there's some way he could come out and speak to a Boosters Club meeting to help them raise money for a good cause. And he hardly ever took a paycheck for doing that. In fact, when Mrs. Hayes cleaned out his office after he had passed away, she found a lot of checks that had been sent to him for speaking fees that went back a few years. They had never been canceled.
Wow.
He just never did that.
Now, as a CPA, that makes you cringe, right, Jack?
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the first thing I do as a CPA.
Right. You're like, that, right.
In the bank. If it's going to bounce, you want to know that right away.
Right. It's like, how are you going to reconcile this book if they're not cashing these checks? Right? So do you have, so speaking of Coach Hayes, did you see any of his practices? Do you have a good story from maybe a practice that you had seen, or when you're on the sidelines or anything like that from when he was coaching?
Well, Marv Holman, Marv is still living. He's retired a number of years ago as a sports information director. And of course, he had a lot of good experiences with Woody Hayes. And soon after Coach Hayes first came in as head coach, he was a little bit different. In fact, I think if you look at Hayes' 3 head coaching positions, first at Denison University in 1946, then as head coach at Miami of Ohio in 1949, and then at Ohio State in 1951. He did not get off to a smooth start in any of those. It was a little rough for him. And it was a little different for the players to get used to his style and everything. And Woody was so determined. And Marv tells a story about one time that he was getting to a meeting, he was late, and there was barely enough room to basically park his car, except if he parked his car there, there was not enough room really to get out of the door. So some way he was able to, before he got to put the car into the parking spot, he just basically got it headed into the parking spot so he could open the door and get behind the car, and then he just pushed the car in. I've often wondered how he got the car out of there later on. One of the other cars next to it had moved or something like that. But everybody had a lot of funny Woody Hayes stories. Tom Maddy was an excellent quarterback here in 1959, 1960. In fact, he was the team most valuable player in 1960. He was one of the running backs on those great Baltimore Colt teams that were so good during the 1960s when John Unitas was the quarterback and Al Amici, the Heisman Trophy winner out of Wisconsin, was the fullback. But Tom was the running back. But he played quarterback here. And Tom was a pretty free spirit. He was always having a good time and joking around. And sometimes that got on Woody Hayes' nerve, joking around as they're getting ready for practice. And there was this one practice that Tom was running plays, but he's having a good time. And Hayes just couldn't take it any longer. He was more and really going to give it to him for, you got to be more serious. You got to be more serious. And he went after Tom. And so Tom started running away from him. And Tom, then they were on the track there at the old track that was in Ohio Stadium, and Tom was running backwards, and he could run backwards faster than Woody Hayes could run forward, and he'd run just fast enough that Woody couldn't catch up with him to hit him. I think Woody was going to hit him or something.
Oh my gosh!
And the other players that were watching this, I mean, they knew they shouldn't laugh, but they could hardly help but laugh.
Right.
What was going on there? But I think any player that played under him for those 28 years would have an abundance of stories of funny things that have happened, and they got to. He was fairly predictable. You know, they knew when to stay away from him.
I bet.
Fall and you're coming off the field, you want to get down to the end of the bench where he is not there, because he's going to let you know what he thought about that fumble. Woody Hayes hated turnovers and really didn't mince any bones about it, really.
Oh my gosh. Like we think today that Urban is intense or Nick Saban is intense, right? So I mean, like there was one time, Jack, we had some friends over, and it was one of those games of would you rather, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
would you rather be Urban Meyer's son-in-law or Nick Saban's son-in-law? And we're just like, oh man, we're like going through the positives of like Urban, like it having to meet his expectation as a son-in-law, but
Mm-hmm.
compare that to what Jack just said, Woody
Yeah.
Hayes, and you just want to stay away from this guy.
Yeah.
Like that is another level of like intensity.
Intensity. Now, I have a question. If your wife was still here, bless her heart, you can think of numbers, you can think of statistics. If she was here, would you be able to tell us when your first date was? What did you do? Is your mind trained to go that way, or is it more just sports oriented?
I definitely remember my first date.
Do you?
Okay.
High school. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember pretty much everybody does that and so forth there. Yeah. I remember her name was Ann Chapelier. And I remember it was the first date. It was actually on Easter Sunday one year. And we went to the same church, and there was a youth group afterwards. So I picked her up and took her to the youth group and things like that. I do remember dates quite well. I remember Woody Hayes' first game was on September 29th of 1951. Jim Tressel's first conference game was exactly what would have been 50 years after that, on September 29th of 2001, and that was a win over at Indiana. And so, I just, I think we all have just abilities for whatever reason to remember certain things. And so dates and scores are something I've been able to, particularly if I read it, and then I seem to kind of be able to make a file of it, and then that helps me remember, the date and the score and everything like that.
Well, we had seen something on, I think it was ESPN Game Day maybe, on Coach Riley from Oklahoma. And he has like a photographic memory. And so they tested him and said, okay, what was the play? It's 3 minutes, 20 seconds in the third quarter of whatever game a couple years ago. And he'd be able to rattle off what the play was, what he called, the amount of yardage they got. Then they asked him, what's your wife's favorite color? And he's like, I have no idea, no clue. He said his mind is purely on football, right? That's where his photographic memory comes from. So that's what made us think of you.
A lot of people, after Vince Lombardi became so successful, a lot of people interviewed him and wrote books about him and things like this. And the one book that was written called, I think it was called Run the Daylight.
Okay.
And that's basically what his offense was, is run the daylight. You got to find that opening and so forth. And the guy interviewed him, and he told all about his football knowledge and how you run the plays. And it went clear back to his first coaching job as a high school coach at St. Cecilia High School in Englewood, New Jersey. And so the guy was asking him about St. Cecilia, and he could remember all the scores, the players, the plays, but he could not remember the colors of the team's uniform.
Really?
Yeah, he said he couldn't remember what the colors were. And I'm sure that was probably accurate. The people like that, like Riley and Lombardi, they remember the things that are important to them. And sometimes it's kind of unusual, some of the things that they don't remember.
Right.
And the second touchdown is one of the most perfectly executed plays I've ever seen. It was Craig Krenzel. Basically, the body language of the quarterback was, we're going to go to the left. And by looking that way, and then he ran basically an option play to the right that was just perfectly executed. And at the last second, he pitched out to Marcus Hall and scored the winning touchdown, and basically won the game 14-9. And that game came down to the last second, too. I mean, Michigan fired one into the end zone with 1 second to go. Will Allen intercepted, and we won the game. And that, there's so many, but that Michigan game of 2002 is a great one.
So where are you at, Jack, on game day? Of course, we hear you during the pregame show, on the pregame call-in show and everything with Jim Lachey and everyone. But where are you at on game days? Are you on the stand and in the stands? Are you on the sidelines? Where do you watch the games from?
Well, Jerry Emig, the sports information director at Ohio State, is very kind, and he's offers me a seat in the press box if I want a seat in the press box. For me, football at Ohio State has always been a family affair. And my radio work and anything else that I do is pretty well finished by game time.
Okay.
I sit with my family in the stadium as opposed to up in the press box. Now, it's a little bit unusual because when I go to the away games, I get a press box pass and I sit in the visiting stadium. In other words, I watch the Ohio State-Michigan game from the Michigan press box. And I like to do that. I usually go to the out-of-town games. My family doesn't go with me. So there I join up with a lot of the other media guys that I've gotten to know over the years, and had a great time watching this year's Michigan game. I sat with Bill Connolly, and
yes,
coordinator and former coach at Ohio Dominican, and it was just great sitting there with Bill and listening to Bill explain what had happened on the field and everything like that. So at home, I'm in the stadium with my family. Away games, I'm in the press box.
So that leads me to what's the best stadium, your most memorable experience at a stadium? So as Steph knows, me and my buddies, we do an annual road trip to an away game every year, right? To an away Ohio State game, right? So this year we're at Ann Arbor. Okay. Last year we were at Penn State College.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the year before that, we're in Iowa City. Okay. So we've seen some really good games. We've seen some bad games. And I'm amazed. And every time I come home, I always tell Steph how amazed I am at the scale of some of these stadiums. Like Northwestern is literally probably half the size of the shoe, right? And then Ann Arbor, Michigan Stadium, was ginormous. Like it was much bigger than I was expecting. So what's been maybe the best college game day atmosphere you've been to outside of Ohio Stadium?
Well, I'd say it would be Urban Meyer's last game as head coach would be covering the Rose Bowl from the press box.
Oh.
That was very special. They handled that beautifully. The accommodations for the press, and then just basically the setting there. The Rose Bowl, you're watching a game, but you can look up and see the San Gabriel Mountains there. The working press is allowed to get down on the field the last 5 minutes of the game. Now, obviously, you have to stay behind the bench and on there, and sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't, because if you get down on the field for the last 5 minutes of the game, you've got to leave the press box, get on the elevator, go down, and find your way onto the gate that lets you in there. You're going to miss about 5 to 8 minutes of the fourth quarter.
Oh, right.
For a close game, I don't want to do that because But if we're way ahead, I usually do that. And we were way ahead of that. In fact, that Rose Bowl tightened up a little bit more than we wanted right at the very end of the game. And get down on the field. And when I do that, I usually go right behind the Ohio State bench. And I watch and I just observe the players and watch what's going on and the emotions of them and so forth there. And seeing that at the Rose Bowl and being there when Urban coached his last game. And then I go to the coach's press conference after the game and just love to hear the after game comments immediately after the game from the coach, and to cover his last press conference was very meaningful for me. So I'd say that was one. I would say this year I went to Nebraska, and first time I'd ever gone to Nebraska. Of course, Nebraska has only been in the Big Ten just 6 years now, I believe, and we don't play them every year.
Right.
And I would say the friendliness of the press box at Nebraska and just the friendliness of the whole community there in Lincoln was about as good as it gets. They treated us extremely well. And we were up, what were we up at the half? I think 35-7 over Nebraska. Those fans didn't leave. They stayed. And you go most places, if you're up 35-7 and you're the visiting team, that home team, a lot of the fans take off. They do it at Ann Arbor. I mean,
they did.
This year where we won,
yes.
56-27.
Yep.
But at the end of that game, there were only red jerseys in the stadium. All the Michigan fans had gone home.
Yep.
They don't do that in Nebraska. They stayed on the end. They're really, really excellent football fans, and I just found that to be very friendly. But I've never found an atmosphere that was bad, really. I mean, some are a little bit better than others, but they're all really good.
Out of all of your years with Ohio State football, can you pick out one team that stands out to you that you could say this is the team that you'll always remember?
Probably 2002, second year. That one I would say, because I can remember that one, and we won so many of those games just by the barest of margins. We barely won out at Purdue. Of course, we barely beat Michigan. And a lot of people forget, Ohio State may have been looking ahead to that Michigan game in 2002, but we played at Champaign, played Illinois out at Champaign-Urbana the week before that game, and we were big favorites in that game.
Oh, that's right.
Remember?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
And that game went into overtime.
That's right.
We easily could have lost that game, but we came through. And we did it time after time after time, but none better than the Fiesta Bowl, where we came in double overtime. We were able to pull that one out of the bag, as you might say, and win that Fiesta Bowl game. And just the way the team won it. And Craig Krenzel was our starting quarterback that year. Craig was an excellent passer. We may have had other quarterbacks who were maybe better passers, but he was really good. Craig was also an excellent runner. Now, we may have had some other quarterbacks that were better runners than Craig, but I don't think we ever had a quarterback that had the running ability, the passing ability, but also the ability to manage a game any better than Craig Krenzel. And I just thought he did just a super job of running that team that year. And without him, we would never have won that national championship.
I could talk to Jack for like hours
all
on
the
a
time. Yeah, I don't want to
Absolutely.
stop, honestly.
But I do want to ask you about your speaking career, right? There's what's amazing with Jack, there's a lot about you that I was not aware of, right? So when I went to your website, jackpark.com, you'll see, listeners, of course, an overview of Jack from he's a CPA, he's got his MBA, he's a bestseller, he's award-winning speaker, he does these seminars, right, as well, which I'm fascinated by. So you have research coaches, right? And you've done some presentations with some coaches as well. Can you talk about that a little bit, what you've done in that field?
I had no idea that I would ever be in football like this. And after I'd been in the corporate world for a while and had changed jobs a couple of times, I really wanted to do something different. There were some elements about the corporate world that were not all that attractive to me, really. And I decided to start my own professional speaking business. By that time, I had a lot of leadership experience. I'd been a chief financial officer at a couple of organizations. And so I started the professional speaking business, and I developed about 4 seminars. Basically, they were business seminars, and I basically marketed those under the title Financial Insights. I also started a speaking business on football, strictly on football, and that was more entertainment.
I bet.
Come out and speak to an annual meeting or there and talk about just like we're having fun talking tonight about the Ohio State football program. And I kind of kept those separate. And I was advised I joined the National Speakers Association, which is a national association for professional speakers. And I was advised pretty strongly by a pretty high-standing member at that time, don't do both. You'll never be very good at if you try to do 2 things. Pick one and really concentrate on it. Well, I did not take that advice. And that would have been the worst advice I ever could have had. Because as the years went along, I decided to marry the 2. And I developed this leadership program, which we call the Leadership Secrets of Football's Master Coaches. And it's basically how to develop leadership within the organization. If you're a corporation, a company, an association, how can I come in through my leadership training and help you develop your leadership team to be much better as leaders?
Now, when I saw that on your website, Jack, you have a picture on your website, jackpark.com, and it's with you with Coach Holtz.
Yes.
Do you have a good story you can share with us here about Coach Holtz?
Yeah, I'll tell you one that I think probably, and this is basically a story that Urban Meyer told me, basically. And Urban Meyer, in fact, I heard Urban Meyer speak back in my home county of Perry County just last Friday. He was back for the
really?
Perry County. They have an annual, what they call breakfast there to raise money. He had about 400 people there to hear him speak, and he told this story back at that breakfast there just a couple weeks ago. But when Urban finished at Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati, and graduated, had played football there. Of course, people know he came to Ohio State as a graduate assistant, and he really connected with Earl Bruce. And he was a graduate assistant under Earl 2 years. His 2 years as a graduate student at Ohio State of 1986 to 1987. Now, after that, he took an assistant coaching job at Illinois State. In the meantime, Bruce was let go here, but Earl Bruce landed on his feet. He became head coach at Colorado State.
Right.
And Earl's first staff included Skip Holtz as the wide receiver coach for Earl at Colorado State.
Okay.
After 1 year there, Lou Holtz, the head coach at Notre Dame, asked his son, would you like to now, I've got an opening on the Notre Dame staff to be a wide receiver coach. Would you like to move from Colorado State to Notre Dame? Naturally, he did. And when Skip left Colorado State, Earl hired Urban as Skip Holtz's replacement.
Okay.
Now, Skip and Urban spent 2 or 3 days together just in the crossover.
Yes.
You know, I'm coming in to take the job, Urban's coming in to take the job, and Skip Holtz is leaving the job. In those 2 or 3 days, they just connected like they'd known each other all their life. And they stayed in contact, and they really helped each other. They meet with each other at coaches' conventions. I think it got to the place that they even vacationed with families together.
Oh, wow.
4 years later, Skip gets a head coaching job at Connecticut. 2 years after that, Lou Holtz now needs a new wide receiver coach at Notre Dame. The gentleman that had that job had taken a head coaching job. He now has that opening again. Skip Holtz called Lou and said, hey, Dad, there's a guy out at Colorado State. His name is Urban Meyer. You need to interview him for the wide receiver job at Notre Dame. And Lou said, I never heard of this guy. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that at all. I'm not going to waste his time. I'm not going to waste my time. I know who I want to hire. And Skip wouldn't let up on it. And his dad said, no, I'm not going to interview him. Well, about 2 weeks later was the annual American Football Coaches Association annual meeting. I believe that year it was down in New Orleans. It's about a 3-day meeting. And the head coaches pretty much all go there. And a lot of the assistant coaches go too. The afternoon before the last day of that meeting, Skip Holtz runs onto his dad in the hall. He says, hey, Dad, I got some things I'd like to go over with you. Could we have breakfast tomorrow morning? And Lou said, sure. So the next morning, Lou is in the restaurant waiting for Skip to arrive for breakfast. In walks Skip, and guess who he has with him?
Coach Meyer.
Says, Dad, I'd like you to meet a good friend of mine. His name is Urban Meyer.
Wow.
That down. Now, Lou Holtz is a guy that's always in charge.
Yes.
Now, all of a sudden, Lou's not in charge. Now, as Urban has told me this story, they all ordered breakfast. Skip ate his breakfast relatively rapidly. Then he looked at his watch and he says, oh, gee, I forgot. I've got a meeting I've got to go to. He got up and left the table and left Urban sitting there with his dad, Lou Holtz. Urban told me they continued to talk for probably up to another hour. The next week, Lou Holtz called Urban Meyer and offered him the wide receiver position at Notre Dame. Naturally, he accepted it, and it was one of the real big breaks in his entire coaching career. So that's one of my favorite stories of Urban Meyer, without question. And, of course, they have stayed in contact ever since then. And the fact that when I heard him speak just last week, he mentioned to this day the two biggest mentors that have really helped him in his career, this is Urban Meyer's career, have been Earl Bruce and Lou Holtz. And if you want a couple mentors, those are not too bad, those two guys.
Not too shabby.
And Skip Holtz sounds like an amazing friend as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah.
No kidding.
Great guy. And, I mean, of course, he played football under his dad at Notre Dame. And then, of course, then became an assistant coach there. And that would not be easy, playing football for your dad.
No, it would not.
If your dad's the Lou Holtz, that would not be easy.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, I want to be very sensitive to Jack's schedule here. For more information about Jack, including how to have him speak at your organization or event, please visit his website at www.jackpark.com. Well, Jack, we want to thank you so much. It was an honor having you on our podcast tonight. Thank you so much, Jack.
It's been my pleasure. I look forward to it. Kevin, Stephanie, thank you very much. And it's been my pleasure to be with you. Hey, I hope we can do this again sometime.
Oh, I would love that.
Would
thank
love
you, sir.
that too. Bye.
Listeners, if you like what you just saw, like what you just heard, please go to iTunes, go to YouTube, and subscribe, rate, review this podcast. That's the only way we'll be able to continue to produce this. Where else can they go, Stephanie?
They can go to kevinandsteph.com. That's all I know, though. So, is that it?
You crushed it.
Yes, crushed it.
Thank you, listeners.